we'll take a step back. I think between like 1% and 5% of people are hard NIMBY. And the NIMBY acronym is not in my backyard. Business confidence or investor confidence has been so low.
Yeah, it's very low.
And without getting too political.
And that's not what we're here for.
No, but it's like going into or coming out of probation at work and your boss just says, oh, you should just be adequate.
Wow, that is quite extensive, I must say.
This is the Property Development Book Club podcast. Please be advised that the views expressed are of the individuals and do not represent their employers and should not be taken as advice. Please do your own research and seek advice from an appointed professional.
Hello everyone, I'm Adewale Ademalake from the Property Development Book Club, and today I am joined by Siddo Dwyer to talk about property development and politics. We work together in a local authority, but firstly, I would like to introduce Siddo Dwyer, who works for Councilio. And if you can tell us what you do, what your background is, it would be great to hear that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and thanks for the invitation on the show. So I'm Siddo Dwyer, as you said, and I work for Councilio Communications, which is a public affairs agency specialised in communications. So we support and advise mainly house builders and property developers who either want to build residential schemes, commercial schemes, or often placemake, which I'm sure we'll discuss during the course of this. And my background, I'd say I'm a political activist first. So I'm a avid Labour Party supporter, activist, campaigner, and I've been the chair of my local Labour Party, so working with our members and our councillors and MPs. I've worked for, I think, 3 MPs, and I've worked for a number of other friends who've gone on to Parliament to advise them on various different things. So I was a caseworker at first, which is essentially a person who helps people through their housing issues, immigration, anything to do with the local authority, dodgy landlords. Look, we met at a local authority in London where I was a political advisor in the leader's office, so advising the cabinet member responsible for planning regeneration. And I also briefed the leader of the council. We also worked on kind of building up our external affairs function, which is quite similar to public affairs and trying to influence the incoming Labour government that we now have to better serve our residents. So that's broadly a background, who I am and what I do. Wow.
That is quite extensive, I must say. No, really, really good to get you on, and thank you for accepting our invitation. So we hear a lot about communications, and a lot of people don't understand what communications is. Can you just explain what communication is and how it is applicable in our industry within the built environment?
Yeah, thanks. So there are so many different words that can be used interchangeably to describe the kind of work that we do. So we're communication specialists, and that primarily starts with a form of advertising or marketing about some of the schemes that we work on. So the base for us, or our bread and butter, is, and we do it really well, and I would say that, is public consultation. So it's effectively communicating and speaking about building a narrative around the kind of schemes that we want to come forward. I mean, some polling from kind of think tank that works really closely with and influences lots of Labour Party policy found that between like 1% and 5% of people are hard NIMBY. And the NIMBY acronym is not in my backyard, so people who don't really want to see any development come forward.
Yeah.
And that's quite a small number, but
5% you said?
Yeah, between 1% to 5%. There's some polling done.
I thought that would probably be more like 90%.
I would have thought so, because again, the kind of work that we do, we see that there is a lot of angst or concern, perhaps discomfort, from local residents about the kind of developments that may come forward near them and the impact that it will have on their amenity, so their kind of quality of life and the kind of services that they use. But actually, the polling also found that what people mostly wanted were kind of social infrastructure to support that development. So around mainly healthcare. So people really wanted GPs to come forward if that were the case, and they also had concerns around not just social infrastructure like GPs and stuff, but public, good, efficient public transport to support that. So Yeah, it's often we're creating a new community, which is often what my clients, especially the bigger schemes that I work on, try to do. It's working with the community to make sure that there's infrastructure there to support those who live there and in the surrounding area, and also those who are looking to visit.
No, that's very interesting. That is because we talk about social infrastructure. That is what Section 106 is for. Well, Section 106 is a legal obligation placed on developers to effectively make something appropriate that wouldn't otherwise be appropriate. So they will put financial contributions towards Section 106s, towards community facilities or wherever it may be. And they've also got SILs, Community Infrastructure Levy. We'll explain that in another video. But that's really helpful. So you are, as you mentioned, you're trying to work with the community to communicate the objectives of a development and making sure that there's a happy medium between the community and the developer.
Yeah, broadly, and perhaps our added value or where our insights really come into play, and perhaps someone like myself, is we work as perhaps a conduit between our clients, who are often, again, house builders and those who are kind of build or create new spaces for the public, and also communicate and tell a story to the decision makers and the politicians who are going to hopefully approve the schemes that we're working on. So in that vein, we are working with the public, and that could be residents and community groups, other kind of amenities in the area, so schools and perhaps churches or other kind of religious temples or so, perhaps synagogues, and working with the decision makers, so those who set the strategic direction, often the cabinet member or the leader, depending on the size of the scheme and who holds the portfolio, and then working with ward councillors so that they are channeling the concerns that their residents have, but also any concerns that they may have, or actually often the support that they have for the schemes, and making sure that we're, again, finding that happy medium. And eventually, once we've kind of gone through that informal consultation process, which our clients can bring us on board to help with, there's a formal consultation process where the council then looks to get feel for how the public perceive the scheme. Then that will then go to planning committee, which is a quasi-judicial function that councils have to undertake, which is to approve, and it's probably one of the most powerful functions that the council has, to shape the areas that they live in. Exactly. But that's so complicated.
No, it is, and we've got various conversations about planning.
I'm sure we'll come on to it, but it's a good process in that it involves lots of people. But I think the pace that the process forces you to undertake under legislation, of course, is it stops supply. It stops homes from coming forward and bringing down costs.
And we're coming to that shortly, because I've got an interesting question on that, but we'll come to that. But I think that it's very interesting to note that you mentioned it's not only the community that you're engaging with key decision makers relating to leaders of the councils, and the leaders of the council are the political leads of that particular borough, which is quite interesting. It's very important to know, and your ward councillors, because when you submit a planning application in a ward, everyone's notified. Yes. But in order for you to not go in and effectively not understand the issues of the community, all the opportunities, you have to have that initial conversation, and that is basically the power of what you come in to do, basically.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I've worked with various developers over my time, and one of the difficult things I would say is when I started on my own, I'm not going to go off and employ a communications company, but I remember when I was in the corporate entities, the process through the whole planning process, we're talking tens of thousands of homes, it's totally different, because they would have invested heavily into this engagement, this communications. So that's really helpful. So this going on to the third point, or third question, it says politics influences business both positively and negatively, which I'm sure you would agree with. In your opinion, what sets the current government apart, and how has it been beneficial to your house building clients to date?
Really good question. I think you're right. We'll take a step back. I think it's important to have that conduit between the more productive part of our economy, which employs 27 million people, I think I read before I came
In the
into
private sector?
Yeah, in the private sector. That's a sizable chunk of our economy. And then you've got the public sector that's just above, I think, 1 in 8. So about 17 or so percent. I thought I got my maths right there. About 17% of people in the... You need to have that positive working relationship between those who set the regulatory framework that we're all living under. And when I first got into this, I couldn't tell you how taken aback. I found it remarkable that local authorities could dictate the airflow system in buildings.
Yeah, they
can. Sometimes, I mean, my company's been hired, and I've worked on schemes to consult the public on awnings. So like the kind of shelter that comes out in front of shops. Our regulatory system dictates that.
All of that,
So,
yeah.
And it's for what is deemed a free economy. That I think is it's good that the government can get involved and make sure that there's kind of good safety measures and good quality standards. But when you are working with the majority, if you will, who are kind of delivering services or things like food, provisions like housing, you need to have that good connection, or at least that conduit, that functional working relationship to make sure that the government is doing its job, which is kind of keeping us safe and facilitating growth, and those on the ground who are creating growth, creating wealth, and hopefully that wealth is properly spread, is important, which comes on to why kind of this incoming Labour government. I think it's good. I can't tell you the past year, and you've probably seen this, business confidence or investor confidence has been so low.
Yeah, it's very low.
And without getting too political,
and that's not what we're here for.
No, but it's I think that the outgoing Conservative government most certainly left the country in a place where there was a lack of business confidence. We weren't investing in the things that we needed to, and there are real positives that are coming out of the work that Angela Rayner's doing, and you've seen a more regional level here in London with Sadiq Khan and lots of local authority leaders, most of which are Labour. There's more business confidence out there because there's clear direction on what this government wants to do. The last government tried to pass planning reform, didn't work. The Chesham-Amersham by-election that was lost to the Lib Dems really put a stop in the road for any kind of reforms that Boris Johnson wanted to implement, and lots of his predecessors and successors tried to. I think by the time we saw the end of that Conservative government, there were at least 13 housing ministers. Like you can't do...
That's a lot of ministers.
Yeah, you can't do any form of work, whether it's in the private sector or in the public sector, with someone who's constantly changing.
And the MPPF changed how many times in that period?
So many different changes, whether it's the MPPF, which is the National Planning Policy Framework, that kind of governs the work that, or kind of sets the direction for the work, for the kind of buildings that should come forward and the spaces that should come forward. Lack of confidence, lack of regulatory clarity. Whereas what Labour's come in and said is, we want to build 1.5 million new homes, which is a lot, and it's perhaps double what we're currently doing in terms of new home starts and completions. And they've been clear that they're looking at things like planning passports, which is effectively saying it's a form of zoning. This is what, this is a plot of land, this is what we think should come forward, and these are the parameters that you should work within. And that's far more clarity than what we currently have. With
how long would it take to implement that type of initiative?
Well,
if they are going to go from obviously a town planning-led or plan-led system to zoning, surely that is a very fundamental change into how planning determinations happen and homes are brought forward.
I have to say, in the work that I've been doing for the past a third of my life, so the last decade, I've never come across a piece of legislation like the 1947 Town and Country Planning Act that needed to be scrapped. And that's not a Labour Party position. But it is, for my own reading, and I count myself as a layman, probably an above average consumer, someone who I read and stuff, but I'm not an expert. It is just, it's a discretionary piece of legislation that just literally stymies growth at every single term. So put simply, it has you jumping through so many hoops, producing so many reports, the length of time that it takes, and its kind of most cardinal sin, I think, is it allows a very small minority of people who probably own their own home, have a vested interest in opposing development, to stop it from coming forward just through spurious objections, taking local authorities or property developers to court over, again, mostly spurious claims around things like the environment and stuff, which is obviously important, but they're using the system to their advantage to stop new homes from coming forward. And Labour's trying to put a stop to that. It's changing the legislation so that it's clear that Labour is going to reform the Greenbelt, which I think, again, another cardinal sin. It's reclassifying parts of the country that have been bound by legislation to not have homes come forward through this idea of stopping urban sprawl.
Yeah, I submitted a planning application on one of my projects, personal projects, and it got rejected purely because it was Greenbelt. Low value, has no amenity value to anyone, but just simply because of that classification, that development couldn't come forward.
And again, I think we are fortunate enough to live in a nice, beautiful country that has lots of green space, and but the function of the Greenbelt has always been political.
Always
been. It was brought in the mid 50s, or perhaps sort of the latter end of the 40s, to confine urban areas which were typically Labour, still are typically Labour, from expanding and encroaching on perhaps more Tory territory. And
do you think that's the reason?
It's been speculated that's largely the reason.
I never appreciated that.
Yeah,
it was
everything is political. I've always said everything is political. The circular nature of this this coffee table is political. Everything can be framed in politics, and it wasn't just to preserve our green precious lands. I mean, they've calculated that only about 5% of the UK has been built on, has any form of.
So land is not the issue, clearly.
Land's not the issue. The issue is, well, in my view, it's confining Labour voters, or kind of a form of gerrymandering that stops urban areas or certain types of people building large population centres in areas that typically vote for another party. It's wrong.
I'm sure many people would disagree with that.
They may well disagree with it. They can read the legislation themselves and look at the impact.
Because if I ask the planner that question, I'm sure they will have a different opinion.
Yeah, but that's why I do my job, which is I advise planners and house builders on how they can get their schemes through and how they can communicate that to the public and to politicians. And that's why they do the technical work.
No, you know what?
I know that seems quite.
It seems very focused on politics.
Yeah, because again, and going back to the core of your question, Labour's kind of ripping lots of things up, and they're looking at things differently, about how you can bring forward new homes in a way that's more efficient to what we've seen over the last 80 odd years. But while there's a good relationship there that can be maintained between business and the public sector and kind of the political world, is I can see the intentions of certain things and I can communicate that to my clients. If they wish to follow that, that's why they hire me and then why they've got an advisor. And if they do not, then you find yourself in a bottleneck where political objectives aren't being met, commercial objectives aren't being met, and then the kind of public good isn't being met either, because there's a conflict there between profits and there's a conflict there between people's kind of well-being. So, yeah.
No, that's really helpful. So I think the main thing that you say is that obviously you've got the new planning policies, legislation that may come forward in the term.
Or even the loosening of.
Making
it more.
And I think confidence, definitely. I feel that there is a confidence, but I think that you would also note that quite a few people are still a bit apprehensive. If you look at house building within the public sector, that has literally taken a nosedive. So we're talking housing associations are not building. A lot of them are downscaling their teams. So definitely the autumn statement and the spring statement is going to be fundamental in unlocking development, because I've seen various housing associations stop. They've got developments, massive developments that they previously committed to. They've just said that we can't continue it. So that's quite interesting. So the next question I have is more to do with like housing targets. So some think tanks believe that the housing targets that we've set, which is commonly 300,000 homes a year, is attainable, while some industry professionals like myself struggle with the issues of finding land, as you mentioned, the Greenbelt, and securing planning permission. Do you think there's a disconnect between political aspirations and the realities of those targets?
Never. Never. No. In all seriousness, I think that's again where the job of politicians is to set the mood music. That's what confidence really is. It's the mood music about what they want to achieve.
Yeah.
And it's like going into or coming out of probation at work, and your boss just says, "Oh, you should just be adequate. You shouldn't set yourself any kind of high targets." No. Labour's saying it's time to be outstanding. Even though they've actually removed single word assessments for schools, but. Labour's setting a good, ambitious target. Where the conflict, and I've perhaps not the conflict, but where the tension I've found in speaking to lots of my clients and even people in the public sector and local authorities, is that construction costs are so high, which comparatively, when you look abroad, our construction costs aren't that high, but they're higher from the base that they started pre-pandemic. We've got a skills shortage.
Yeah.
And
Is that still the case now?
Yeah, I mean,
From
we're still plugging skills with kind of high levels of migration, which again, there's another added tension there politically. And then I think, and one thing I've been reading, and you can tell my politics, but the Tony Blair Institute has looked at kind of speculative buying in certain areas, like my native Enfield, where not only are house prices, I mean, they're relatively low compared to the rest of London.
Yeah.
The fact that the Greenbelt, which accounts for about 29-30%, so just under a third of the borough, is stopping any form of housing coming forward on certain plots of land, and the council's looking at releasing parts of its Greenbelt in its local plan view.
Yeah.
And you've got local objections to new homes. I can't tell you the amount of parts of Enfield that are adverse for some legitimate reasons around community infrastructure and their own well-being. But there are some unreasonable concerns around just wanting to see homes come forward for whatever reason. And then there's the speculative buying and the investor market.
That's exactly what I'm into.
Yeah, like it's the international investment community that wants to invest in the UK, and they should. But I think there should be a serious conversation had kind of moving forward around those incentives and what makes it not just the UK attractive, but what makes some developers think it's appropriate to buy up lots of land or perhaps buy up lots of property and not utilise it in the way that they should.
Yeah,
and that's
understood.
what's driving prices up. And that's not talking about land banking. That's
something different. So we're talking, I don't know, people that might buy a block of flats. They've got a pension fund. Is effectively a means of them parking their money in a safe economy.
Lots of people need to rent. Lots of people want to buy.
Yeah.
And it's it's really difficult.
All right. So just going back to the question was political aspirations and the reality. Do you think there's a disconnect?
Perhaps we're going to change it slightly. I don't think there's a disconnect. I just think it's about time the private sector and government were more ambitious to meet those targets.
Of course, I agree.
That we're looking more seriously at the regulatory framework to try and loosen it, but also make it such that we can actually build the homes that we need. Looking at our skills and doing what we can to make sure that we have the workforce to build the properties that we need. And I think, going from 170,000
to 300
is a lot, but it pales in comparison to, I think the Centre of Cities produced a report earlier this year that said that we're actually 4.3 million homes down on where we should be when you compare us to our European partners. So let's set a target and let's really go for it. I want us to hit that 1.5, and then I think there's another conversation.
At least that's the new. We need that to be our new floor.
Yeah, we need that to be our new floor, and the ceiling. That should be our base and our floor, and the sky's our limit.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask these next two questions, final questions, very, very quickly. The first one is, why should a developer consider working with you, and what benefits can they expect?
I think any house builders or anyone that wants to work in this kind of environment that we're in, which is a tough and regulatory one that's been the case for decades, it's important for you to work with the community. They live there and they're part of that community that you want to build and the spaces you want to build. But working with them to find that happy medium, like you said, I think is important.
Okay, and then the final question, and this is probably, maybe I'm putting you in a philosopher's chair. as they say. They said that I can't remember the philosopher. If you gave someone the ability to create the world, it said that if that person creates the world and they find themselves to be on the opposite side of the world they created, would they like the world that they live in? And that is it's a political statement to say that people should put policies that will benefit them if they were on the receiving end. I'll send you I read it in the book called Sophie's World, isn't it? So it's a great book. And you see, book club, this is the benefit of reading. So we're talking about supply and demand, and you know that the Help to Buy scheme was a game changer for house builders, as you probably know. And I said, in your ideal scenario, what measures would you implement to improve supply and demand, knowing that Help to Buy no longer exists? And that is the final question.
That's a good question, because I think although Help to Buy helped to get a lot of people on the housing ladder, it was a demand side measure that was just pushing up house prices. What I really want to see and what I'm really encouraged by is actually what Labour's starting to do, which is planning passports to give guarantees so that we are setting clear parameters around affordable housing and kind of heights and stuff to really get homes built. I want to see a reform of the green belt and start to looking at areas, like you said, that aren't of good value, like shrubs and car parks. They don't need to be in the green belt. Let's start building and using them more efficiently. I want us to start utilising pockets of land and really upzone around our train stations. I mean, if you look at Auckland and the work that they've done there, and actually that progressive Labour government did down there, they've seen pockets of land and they're really boosting supply. And what's actually starting to happen is by changing the regulatory framework and loosening it and building new homes, you're actually starting to see costs rise more slowly, and you're starting to see rents go down. What I want to see is costs not rising more slowly, but to actually come down in a way that doesn't obviously too negatively impacts our economy. So I just want to see a loosening of the regulatory framework to see new homes come forward, homes that people can live in, spaces that we want to be in, and kind of homes that people can afford. And I think that's a cardinal pursuit of anyone, and a moral obligation that this government set itself, and I think the private sector should probably follow and do what they can to boost supply. Perfect.
So that concludes our interview. And Siddo, thank you so much for coming today. It's always a pleasure. And Siddo, I don't know if you want to just tell people where they can connect with you.
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So Siddo Dwyer, which I wouldn't think I'd be saying.
I'll put it on. We'll put it on the bottom somewhere.
And I'm sure you can follow me on Twitter as well. Which so Twitter, LinkedIn, and I'm sure we'll probably see lots of people around networking events and stuff.
Of course. So thank you all for listening. This episode we talked about property development and politics. A lot of key gems given by Siddo today. If you've got any questions, please like, share and subscribe. Go in the bottom, write your comments, and I'm sure I can forward it to Siddo to answer. So thank you very much, and see you on the next episode. In the privacy book club, racing up the road.